I want to look again at this passage at the end of chapter 2 of Ephesians, verses 11 through 22. So let's do this. Let's read, for starters, just a couple verses. Let's just read 11 and 12, and you're going to make some observations with me. I've already written some things on the board here, but we'll make some observations about this Jew-Gentile distinction, all right? So verses 11 and 12. Can someone read that for me? Doesn't matter which translation, just go for it.
Therefore, remember, that formerly you, the Gentiles in the flesh, were called uncircumcision by the so-called circumcision, which is performed in the flesh by human hands. Remember, that you were at that time separate from Christ, excluded from the commonwealth of Israel, strangers to the covenants of promise, having no hope without God in the world.
Okay. So this Jew-Gentile distinction, he gives several marks of the Gentile side of things, and I listed them here, the ones that Ryan just read. And so let's just quickly talk about these. You think of in terms of ethnic realities. So you got the Jewish race all the way from really at its beginnings in Genesis, right? Genesis, Abraham and his descendants, and of course Jacob, whose name was changed to what? Israel. Right? So then you have the Jewish people all going back to the very beginning there in Genesis. And you have this term Gentiles, which refers to everybody else, all non-Jews. And here it says that they are marked by, first of all, uncircumcision. So circumcision, we know it's a strange kind of concept to think, well, why is that the sign of demarcation? But that's something God established for young Jewish boys to set them apart from the surrounding people. But by the time Paul uses the term, all these thousands and thousands of years later, by the time Paul uses this term, it's loaded with a lot of other things. So what does that represent? Like, kind of what does the Gentiles being the uncircumcision and the Jews being circumcision, what does that represent symbolically? Do you know?
Sanctification.
Okay, sanctification. So, and we would define it as like a set apart status, right? Another big word that is similar would be consecrated. That God had separated His people, consecrated His people, and this is one of the marks of that separation, that distinction. Okay, what else? Just think in terms of human nature and what we do with distinguishing features. What do we tend to do with them? We either feel really bad about them or we feel really good about them. So what does it look like or how do we experience like a form of pride in a distinguishing mark? Can you give an example, or can you think of any?
Sneeches. Dr. Seuss.
What are you thinking of? Dr. Seuss reference?
The Sneeches.
Sneeches. I don't remember. Which
Some of them had stars on there.
Okay.
And some of them didn't.
Okay. And the stars were kind of like the special ones?
The
hip ones. Okay.
They were foul.
Okay. We had, Ryan and I have had this conversation. So when I was in seminary, graduates who had a certain grade point average, if your GPA was high enough, you would have these yellow grad cords over one shoulder. And where I went to seminary, not only that, but if your GPA was high enough, they would read your grade point average when they ushered you across the stage at the graduation in front of the thousands of people that were there. So I knocked a few years off my life through stress, trying to make sure I graduated with honors so that they would read my GPA, because they would read it, and then the next guys, it was just like they would read the name, and it was just this silence. And so Ryan's raising his hand. I wasn't going to bring it up, but since you did, shame on you. Ryan had no grad cords. So there's an example of like we take pride in these marks, these signs of demarcation, how we're set apart, right? And you can be sure, as we're seeing even in our culture today, there's the race issue, the distinctions. They're very important to us. There's much more than just some outward sign. Like, there's a lot loaded within that. And for Jews and Gentiles, you couldn't get farther apart than those two people groups were. And in terms of the hostility and the historical, generations and generations of hostility between these people groups, with these folks by and large despising these folks, and these folks feeling the same way about the Gentiles, right? So this is an ongoing historical feud of major proportions, okay? And so Paul, as he's addressing the gospel, he is highlighting, part of the way he highlights the miracle that the gospel is by saying that there are these two warring factions who have historically been at war, and that's been the way it's been forever and ever as long as they go back to their origins, right? And he says, hey, these Gentiles were uncircumcised, so they were, from a Jewish standpoint, looked down upon. I put the Jews up here and Gentiles down here for a reason. We'll get to that in just a second. Separate from Christ, and Jesus came through the Israelite line, not the Gentile line. Excluded from the commonwealth of Israel. So they didn't have access to the same benefits that the Israelites had. Strangers to the covenants of promise. So remember, Jews had all this heritage, right? They had this history that involves God's participation in the founding of their people group, them as a nation, and all the different things God did, giving them miraculous provisions and victories in all sorts of wars throughout the ages. Of course, we just went through Exodus as a church together. So they have this great heritage, and the Gentiles did not in the same way. The Jews had the covenants, the Gentiles did not. And then he, at the end, says, having no hope without God in the world. So you get this clear picture that the Gentiles are, well, let's use this word, excluded. Okay, they're excluded. The Jews, as you read the text, initially you get the idea that the Jews were not excluded. They were included. We could write the opposite of all these things over here. Okay, they had all these privileges and benefits. But still, even as we read, let's read a little farther. I want to illustrate something for you. So let's read, we just did 11 and 12, right? Let's read, my computer keeps sleeping here. Let's read 13 on to 16. Someone read 13 to 16 for me. Ephesians 2, 13 to 16.
But now in Christ Jesus, you who were formerly far off have been brought near by the blood of Christ. For he himself is our peace, who made both groups into one, and broke down the barrier of the dividing wall, by abolishing in his flesh the enmity, which is the law of commandments contained in ordinances, so that in himself he might make the two into one new man, thus establishing peace, and might reconcile them both in one body to God through the cross, by having put to death the enmity.
Okay, so as Matt was reading there, you heard this reference to the barrier, the dividing wall. The law is mentioned. So here's the barrier, okay? And this is one dimension of the barrier, is between these peoples. Now, how would you understand that barrier? In addition to everything we've said so far about them being two different people groups, how would you understand that barrier? And maybe let's even put a finer point on it. How would you understand it with reference to the law? Okay? So when he talks about the law and this barrier between Jews and Gentiles, how would you understand that? Donald?
So I guess a few ways. I'm thinking about Romans right now, where Paul starts talking about the Gentiles without the law will die, or they'll perish without it. But the Jews with the law will actually be judged by it. So in terms of this distinction, it's almost held more accountable or have less of an excuse than the other. Not that one was necessarily more superior or had an advantage.
Okay, good. And so God gave the law through Moses, who himself was an Israelite, right? So that all came through a Jewish person to the Jewish people. So there's the giving of the law, and they have it and they don't have it. But as Donald mentioned, even though they don't have it, Paul says in Romans, they kind of, in a sense, still do have law. And it's like, in one sense, the Jews are held almost to a higher degree of accountability, but the Gentiles also are still accountable. So the Jews are closer in that God had revealed himself, and they had all this history and God's involvement in the forming of their nation and the preservation of their nation. They have that special privileged place. And the Gentiles don't. So there's that barrier. And both people groups knew it, that was one of the points of contention, or one of the marks of distinction. Okay, they knew it. But interestingly, as you read it, you look closely, here's the picture you start to get. And Donald alluded to this. So not only do you have this division this way, but you still have a problem here, vertically too, don't you? You still have that vertical problem. So maybe the Jews had more of God's involvement and more of God's revelation and all of that, and that was a privilege. They were closer. And Paul even says in one place, I think it's in Romans, what benefit does the Jew have then? Well, he has lots of benefits, and then he had all this stuff. Okay, the Jews had all of this, but still, there's a problem, and the law reveals this problem. It reveals both the barrier vertically and the barrier horizontally. Okay, and then he says, if you look, which was read, but look at verse 13. Let's start there, and I'll read this time. So back up again. But now in Christ Jesus, you, and he's referring to you Gentiles, okay? So Paul himself being Jewish, he's referring to them with the second person pronoun there. You, who were formerly far off, have been brought near by the blood of Christ. He himself is our peace, who made both groups into one, broke down the barrier of the dividing wall. So initially you think this dividing wall is just this way, okay? And God broke it down and made them one. And that's all true and it's all good. We're going to illustrate that a little bit more in a minute. But then he says, he did so by abolishing in his flesh the enmity, which is the law of commandments contained in ordinances, so that in himself he might make the two into one new man, thus establishing peace, and might reconcile them both in one body to God. And I highlighted this in my sermon last week, but this is so important, just these two words, to God through the cross. So here's what he's saying, and this to me is interesting, even just kind of from an image standpoint, like from a visual standpoint. It's like he's saying, so here you have the cross, right? And the cross eliminated the enmity, not just the enmity here. This is a secondary issue, but it eliminated the enmity from a vertical standpoint. Both Jews and Gentiles needed to be reconciled to God, right? And how did that take place? It took place through the work of Christ on the cross, what he did, which makes peace with God. It's not that somehow, because the Jews had all these privileges, that somehow they were already reconciled to God. There's still a problem. And the law, as Donald pointed out, it's like they had a higher level of accountability. And Paul says the law came in that sin would abound. Like the more laws were given, the more people's guilt was also revealed. And through the cross, God put an end to it. He put to death the enmity. So we could say, if, I can't really do this well, but it's like these dividing walls are brought down. Maybe I'll just do it this way. Let's do it this way. So we have this one body. I think Jack Funk's not here. He's OCD about my circles. He wants them to be perfect. So in this in Christ reality, which Paul's been preaching from the beginning of this letter, he says, hey, all of this is now taken care of in Christ. And these barriers are eliminated in Christ. You tracking? All right, somebody say something so I can erase this. All right, since you're not going to, let me read a little bit more. So he says, verse 17, he came and preached peace to you who are far away and peace to those who are near. Notice that language. So peace to you, you Gentiles who are far away. Remember, they were farther away. They weren't quite as close. But also peace to you who are near. Why? Because they weren't reconciled either. So they also needed to hear this gospel of peace. And then he says, for through him we both have access in one spirit to the Father. How does someone gain access to the Father? Through the law, through the covenants of promise, through being part of the Commonwealth of Israel? No. They gain access in one spirit to the Father. So then you are no longer strangers and aliens, but are fellow citizens with the saints and are of God's household. And this is really what I wanted to get to. That was all kind of like preliminary stuff. What I wanted to get to is these three metaphors he uses to describe this oneness. Okay? So this one body reality in Christ, and he uses these metaphors of citizenship. So I'm going to say nation, even though the word nation is not in there. Let's see, household, right? What other, for those who have been in our Ephesians study, what other terms have been used that would make you think of a household in this letter? Does anyone remember any of the other language Paul uses that speaks of like a household or family? Can anyone think of any of those? Crickets. Think back to the beginning, chapter 1. Remember the in Christ blessings, every spiritual blessing in the heavenly places. You think of any of those that are related to like a household or family, or how is God referred to? That would, sons adopted, right? God's referred to even isn't he referred to this way here even access to who? To God as what? Father, right? So we've got these pictures, these metaphors to speak of this one body reality. Now, this is the only thing I'm going to say about this, because it's easy to get sidelined and we all have strong opinions about stuff. But just if you think about when an election cycle is upon us, and on the news they're talking about, okay, here's how the polls look right now. Do you notice how? And I heard someone lecturing on this topic recently, and I heard him mention this, like, wow, that's true. I never really thought about it. But you notice how they'll say, hey, so-and-so got X percentage of the African-American vote. So-and-so got X percentage of the Hispanic vote. X percentage of the female vote. X percentage of and so it's all like categorized. You notice that? So while everyone says, hey, we want oneness and we want unity, we can't agree how to get there, and we have all these ways of continuing to reinforce the distinctions. So you have here biblically, you couldn't have a starker contrast in terms of people groups than you have between the Jews and the Gentiles. And God says, miracle of all miracles, I have eliminated the enmity. And here's how I did it. I reconciled everybody to myself. And this is why I said what I said last week. I was feeling particularly strong about it then, which is the idea that I don't know what could be more equalizing than being confronted with the fact that in my natural state, if encountering God in person, in the flesh, if I were to encounter Christ and to live with him long enough, naturally speaking, and I know it's like a choking on a bone, but naturally speaking, I would put him to death. The Bible uses the term enmity. We are at enmity with God. It uses it here in Romans. In Romans, it's very clear that it's enmity, it's hostility toward God. So if God pushes me enough, I would put him to death. That's a weird concept, but if you can accept it, it's really, really humbling. And if that's true of me, and that's true of you, then who has the high ground? Who has the right to boast? What virtue can be signaled if that's what by nature I am guilty of, capable of? I really, truly, and here's the only way I can make this a little bit real to us. I feel like it's something that God has to help us see, because it's so hard to believe that that's our disposition toward our Creator. It's just really hard to believe that. So the best way I can illustrate that, I think, is just when things in your life, when you find yourself, and you all do, some of you more easily than others, but you all at times feel really frustrated and angry and hostile. And it's usually aimed at other people. But 1 John says, when you aim that at other people, whoever they are, whatever they've done, doesn't matter, that is, underneath it all, a hostility that really is aimed upward.
Well, typically I don't know if we're conscious of this, but if we really were to process it, we're actively looking for someone to aim our frustrations at. Like actively. It's not a passive thing, like, oh, that person hurt me, so therefore I'm mad. Like, it's like all the internal anger, anxiety, depression, frustration. I need an outlet for that, so I'm going to find it wherever I can.
I'm cutting my 10 by 10 patch of grass the other day, so not real long, like a minute and a half. Going back, and I'm thinking, and it's just related to certain people that it's none of you guys, but it's just like I am not happy with. And I thought to myself, why am I at war all the time? You're right. It's like we got to aim it somewhere, tag it on somebody for this, and here's the reason. And I could give you specific reasons, but
What's so interesting too is, like, okay, God knows that about us, and He gave us a target to hit, and the target that He gave us to aim at is what saved. This is Christ who saved our lives. So it's interesting that He took that terribleness of us, that hostility and that anger, that hatred we have, and aimed it at the place that He would use to save us.
yeah, to me that's just unbelievable. It's incredible. I mean, so that's why I said last week, the cross is the one event in human history where, God lets us kill Him. And it's like He says, hey, that's why He says, look upon the cross, look at it. And so what do you see when you look at the cross? You see, for one thing, you see what you're capable of. And you know what you see in response to that? Mercy, love. Is the indictment of the human condition and absolution for the human condition. Guilt and forgiveness.
At the same time, He said, it pleased Him to bruise Him for our transgressions. And it's, to me, that is, I have a lot of sons, and I think about causing my sons such horrible pain for the sins of others. And I mean, it's just amazing.
So God looks down from heaven, right? And this is just one, so is this one person, okay? Whoever, you, me, anybody, people back then, whatever. And there's all this division and hostility, right? The barrier, dividing wall. Vertically, horizontally, it's just garbage. Like if you want to list out, okay, so what's the human experience with all this division stuff? It's all ugly, nasty stuff. And we all know it, not just intellectually, but we know it experientially, right? And so God looks down and sees all this darkness in the human heart, turmoil, chaos, division, strife, all this stuff. And He knows that it's aimed upward, and it's also aimed outward. And who suffers as a result of this? Well, this dude suffers, and everyone in his or her life suffers. And God Himself, in a way, even though God's impervious because He's omnipotent and He's not subject to pain the way we are, but nevertheless He's grieved by it. He sees all this. He sends Christ, and through the work of Christ, He says, I am making provision for this. mess. I'm providing covering for this. I'm providing cleansing. I mean, you think of all the different terms used. Reconciliation and redemption and adoption. And I am applying grace to you in all of that hostility. In all of your misery that is largely self-imposed and that it is perpetuated by our lies and our blinders and everything else. And so when it says, to your point, Jim, when it says that the Father was pleased to crush him, like that's not an isolated statement that's just some weird kind of divine child abuse. Like God just kind of got his jollies out of beating his son up. That's not what that means, right? I think we know that. It's saying, look, God knows. It's like when it says of Christ that he for the joy set before him, he endured the cross, despising the shame. He knew the outcome. What was the outcome? A bunch of these people are rescued. And God wanted that really badly. Because contrary to human nature, he doesn't respond in kind. He doesn't respond to hate with hate. He responds to hate with mercy and love and covers. And that, by the way, is, let's just say it mildly, really, really, really unique. Meaning humans aren't like that. We're not like that. Even when we think we're like that, let someone push you far enough. Your niceness will fade away at some point. I guarantee it. I love the stories. The story, Charles Spurgeon, you guys have heard of Charles Spurgeon. He was having this debate with someone who believed in this sort of holiness movement and this idea of sinless perfectionism. So this guy believed in sinless perfectionism and had claimed to Spurgeon as they're debating, claimed that, I've reached this state. So Spurgeon took his big giant boot and just stamped on the guy's foot. And the guy flipped out. What are you doing? He's like, see, I told you, you still sin. So as we've talked, and I've had lots of conversations about this recently because of everything going on in the news, and I've confessed to you before, I'm way too addicted to reading it all and watching it all. With all this going on and contemplating the question of racial unrest and disharmony, and the fighting, the quarreling in our culture, the culture war, the religious right, the liberal left, the social justice warrior thing, the anti-social justice warrior, all that stuff, all these different, there's a gazillion examples, okay? With all that stuff going on, there's just this truth that just drops in our lap from Ephesians 2. It just says, hey, this is who God is. This is what God's done. He's eliminated the enmity. He has broken down the dividing wall. He has reconciled us to himself. None of us are worthy of that reconciliation. All of us have it. It has nothing to do with the color of our skin or our socioeconomic status or where we grew up or what our viewpoints are. It has nothing to do with any of that. It has to do with we have a heart that is in the disposition that is hostile to our Creator, and our Creator has had love and mercy and grace to pour out on us, to forgive us, and to bond us to himself through Christ forever and ever and ever and ever. And that is unconditionally, eternally secured for us, and you can never lose that, and that's the good news, and there you go. That's what you get. It's pretty good, right? And at least in this moment, we can say, that's amazing. And you just, do what David just did. Just relax. And then he gives these pictures, and here's what my brain's been caught up in. For one thing, these are great pictures. So like citizenship and a nation, and we all have a sense of nationalism and pride. I think it's appropriate in this world. I think it's good, and it's helpful and healthy to have a view of like America and pride in that, or whatever nation you're from, and have a sense of pride in that. I think that's appropriate, to a degree. And he says, look, there's a higher city and a higher kingdom, and you have a king, and your king, unlike the kings of this world, your king is actually perfect. Your king actually says he's going to do something, and he actually does it. Your king actually says he cares about people, and he actually does. Your king says he's going to sacrifice, and he did, to the point where it cost him his life, literally. So there's that citizenship, and the household, and the father, and adopted sons and daughters. and this idea of a temple, a spiritual dwelling. So these people, remember, they got all caught up in that building. They loved that building, man, especially when it was looking good. And in Christ's time, it was looking good. It had been remodeled. It was great. And Jesus is walking by it one day with the disciples. He said, hey, guys, look at that. Soon, that's going to be nothing but rubble. And they were like, what? And other people heard that and like, what are you talking about? I mean, it's blasphemy. That's God's place. It's God's house. So you think it's not. It's coming down.
They should have been familiar with that because it already happened twice.
Right. Let's keep rebuilding this human thing. Let's just put it back. So he says, look, Jesus, my body's a temple. And now you're the temple. And God dwells within you. And it's a special place because God's prepared it to be a special place because He's cleaned the house out through the gospel. He said, your heart is clean, pure. You still live with this garbage, but from God's perspective, it's all taken care of. And He abides with you, and He abides with you, and He abides with everyone else who belongs to Him. So it's a sense of a temple and fellowship, and what. So this is where we talk about a lot. Sometimes we use this term, sometimes we don't. But the term is it's a little Latin term, but simul. Okay, so simultaneous, right? In the English word simultaneous. So simultaneously, we've got these two kind of realities. One, this is all true, and it is far more true than the alternative, but it's also not as visible as the alternative. So visibly and experientially, we still experience a lot of division, don't we? Even within the church. I mean, as we speak, I know of at least a few churches which are being divided by these political hot button issues of our day. Just devastating pain, challenging decisions. As of right now, I'll be careful here, but as of right now, I'm thankful for our church and that I don't feel like, at least from you guys, I don't feel this sense of like being caught in crossfire. But a lot of people do around our country, around our world. The division is palpable. You can feel it. It's in the air.
Honest people are not even trying to reconcile in our own minds.
Right.
I mean, there's always a war
Yeah.
going on and an internal debate going on. And the external is just like the manifestation of that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. So I don't know how, because this even says like it's present tense verbs, right? So to use the grammar, bring the grammatical point out here, where it says, having been built on the foundation. So this is foundation. Beneath it all, and it's the preaching, the teaching of the apostles and the prophets, right? Concerning Christ. It's like this rock solid foundation, this message of who Christ is. And that's the foundation of it all. And he says this temple is being built. The whole building is being fitted together. It's growing into a holy temple in the Lord. So this one body reality, this temple reality, is God is building it. But it doesn't mean, I think it would be either dishonest, naive, just leave it there, I guess. Dishonest and or naive to somehow suggest, well, we're just going to be able to, it's kind of like the sinless perfection thing. We're just going to be able to eradicate all the differences. They simultaneously happen in this world because of our fallenness and our flesh, but simultaneously there's this reality of who God is, what God's done, and one day we'll experience that in fullness, and for the time being we have the tastes of it and glimpses of it and sweetness of it. And I've experienced great fellowship with people in this body. It's fantastic, but it's also not without its challenges, and that's just true. Do you guys feel that way? Let's for just a couple minutes here. What does this, I don't know, how does this connect with what's going on in your mind as you observe the cultural battle? How does this connect with you and your experience in church? Yeah, go ahead, Jim.
So, on a positive, negative point, in a positive way, it's fulfilling of what God said was going to happen, and in a negative way, it's fulfilling what God said was going to happen. And that is that the goats are being separated from the sheep, and the tares are being separated from the wheat. And it's interesting. I think the enemy, Satan, is behind this division. I think that's what he does. And I think that, like in our own family, we have people who are seemingly abandoning Christ for certain ideologies, and it's scary and it's sad, but yet it has to happen.
Mm.
So I don't know. I probably just took you off point. That's all right.
But I know what you're saying, and I think probably most of us can relate, or maybe all of us can relate. And every ideology or whatever, it's a mindset, it's a belief system, and to me, we're presented with a belief system that kind of is an equalizer, that levels the playing field, that offers us mercy if we aren't interested, wherever we stand.
I think too, not just talking about the facts. I mean, this is a person operating himself. I mean, that's where that freedom is, in relationship with him, in him. And it's a relationship with a real active person that's actively involved in our lives, actively pursuing us, actively shepherding and guiding and leading, whether we're conscious of it or not.
Right.
And to me, that it brings rest.
Right.
And when the more that the reality of the relationship with God is brought in front of my face, the more rest I experience. And I enjoy that, because it's a taste of what it'll be without all the taintedness later on. All the chat and everything else is going to be burned away, and we're going to be left with Him in hope and in redemption and grace, and be able to enjoy Him freely and enjoy each other freely without all of our hang-ups and indecision and debates and all of that.
Yeah, I think as you're talking,
So I'm
Go ahead,
trying really hard
yeah.
not to bring up the circle chart.
circles, you love those
I
circles,
love
man.
that circle chart.
Yeah,
but it's-
the
it's
master
what I
card
work
logo.
on in battles.
Yeah, go ahead. Can you explain what you're trying to?
I like drawing more, but basically the two eras, right? Because when God created the world, the fall happened, created this era. Christ died, which began a new era, which will last for eternity. And as Christians, we're living in between those two eras, where we have this both true, where we still have the old, the bad, which will be there until God judges all evil, all sin at once. Because He's not going to do these little individual packets, because it's just not going to work. It's either you have to tainted and corrupted, or you're not. So in order to eradicate, and cleanse us fully, you have to eradicate the source. So being in that in-between state until He eradicates the source, we're experiencing both worlds. On one hand, we have peace, and we have turmoil, and we're learning how to live in between those two truths.
Yeah, so I want to read this text. Go ahead, Amanda. Did you have your hand up?
Yeah, just thinking about that, just seeing in this passage, like last week I was looking at it when you were briefing, but just how that's Christ is our cornerstone. He's the one that unites us. And He's given us the Spirit, and how through the Spirit we have access to the Father, and then how the Spirit is the one growing His holy temple, that building that Christ is the cornerstone of. And He is, He's building us together in this doing it.
Yeah.
So we have hope
Yeah.
through the Spirit.
That's what helps me is, so when I hear the stories, like I hear from friends where there's a lot of division in their churches or in their communities, and they're just feeling it, and it's really painful. And I like the encouragement, okay, from a human perspective, this is what you see, this is what you hear about. But God's saying, look, I'm still doing what I'm doing. And my spirit is active, I'm not being thwarted, I am building my kingdom, I'm building this temple, and he's not going to fail in that regard. And whether I see it or not, it doesn't have any effect on its truthfulness, right? What we see, and sometimes we see evidence of it, but a lot of times we don't. And either way, it's like, this is what's true, right? So what I want to do in closing, and while you guys were talking, I was thinking of this Romans text, and Mikkel's going to read this in service, so you'll hear it again. But I want you to do this. So, and it's not like I got to tell you to do this because you're going to do it anyway. But part of me wants to say, hey, just like ignore stuff going on right now. Like ignore the news. Just go outside. Go fishing. Go do something, right? And that's healthy. Like I tell people sometimes in counseling, hey, look, just go cut the grass or something. I don't know. Go do something else, right? So sometimes that's really good. It's common grace. Like we need that, right? We need those good diversions. But it is good for us in a sense just to go ahead and pay attention. Like, listen to what people say, what people do. And face it. See it for what it is. See the darkness of it. Hear the hostility. What's coming out of you, or you see it coming out of someone else. Just face it. Soak in it for a little bit. And even in this moment, as you're probably doing that a little bit, listen to what Paul says in Romans 8. He says, I consider the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory that is to be revealed to us. For the anxious longing of the creation waits eagerly for the revealing of the sons of God. The creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself will be set free from its slavery to corruption, into the freedom of the glory of the children of God. We know the whole creation groans and suffers the pains of childbirth together until now. And not only this, but we ourselves, having the first fruits of the Spirit, we have a taste. But even we ourselves groan within ourselves, waiting eagerly for our adoption as sons, the redemption of our body. That's what's coming. So face what is, feel what is, grieve over what is. The birth pangs of a mother in labor are not fun. No mom, right ladies, would tell you they are. Not pleasant. But they're productive. They're aiming at something that's glorious and magnificent. New life is coming. New life is coming. So when you see and you feel and I'm a somewhat sensitive guy. When I feel all the dark, oppressive, ugly stuff, the relief and the hope and the peace comes in knowing, hey, this is going somewhere good. Somewhere where all of this hostility is forever gone. It's going to be gone forever. And we're going to see God. We're going to be with him. We're going to be with one another. And all the little first fruits that we get now, we're going to have like this full spread, this abundant spread forever. Man, I can't imagine this is all there is. I've heard some people saying it lately, different thinkers, philosophers, commentators that I listen to, many of them unbelievers, and you hear the ultimate emptiness. There just isn't any hope. It's like a nihilism kind of, where nothing really has any true meaning or value. I think that the universe is not some vacuum, but there's a personal God who loves his creation and loves his creatures and is one day going to redeem and restore the whole thing. And so he says the sufferings of this present time, life is a vapor, right? appears and goes. I mean, my daughter Juliana just turned 13. 13! That's crazy. I'm old. My birthday was recently, pushing my mid-40s. Boom. Just like that. Glory's coming. And going to be a whole lot longer than this experience here. So I hope that encourages you. It's been a good discussion.